Imagine waking up in the year 2036.
Yeah.
It's just a standard, Tuesday morning. You walk down the street, you head into your favorite local cafe, and you order a coffee.
Right.
And you tap your phone, or, perhaps you just scan your palm over a biometric reader to pay. But in that fraction of a second, your money doesn't just process a simple, financial transaction.
It does a lot more than that.
Exactly. It checks your verified, state-issued digital identity. It assesses your recent carbon footprint to see if you've, exceeded your monthly travel allowance.
Wow.
Yeah. And it executes this micro-smart contract checking your social credit standing or maybe your compliance with local zoning laws. And only then, once all those algorithmic conditions are met by the network, does it actually unlock the funds and allow you to sip that latte.
It's a pretty striking image to start with, honestly.
Right.
And, well, depending on who you ask, that scenario is either this dystopian science fiction nightmare or, a highly efficient operational blueprint from a global central bank, or, and this is wild, a literal religious prophecy coming to life.
It completely sounds like sci-fi. But according to a massive new study of financial forecasting, that programmable coffee purchase is the exact future being engineered right now.
Yeah, it's happening.
So today, our mission on this deep dive is to really figure out how we got here. We are unpacking a truly fascinating 2026 paper by Michael R. Williams titled, in their own words, Futurist Visions of the Emergent Financial System.
It's a dense read, but so good.
Oh, it's incredible. Williams basically spent years analyzing over 100 primary sources spanning 8 decades from 1945 to 2026 just to understand how different groups predict the future of money.
Right, because everyone has an angle.
Exactly. We're looking at international organizations, tech billionaires, science fiction authors, and, like you said, even theologians, all trying to answer one fundamental question, which is, what will our money look like tomorrow?
Well, before we really get into the weeds of this paper, we need to establish a very clear baseline for you, the listener, regarding how we are going to approach this material.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Because the sources Williams analyzes, they cover intensely debated, highly sensitive, and frankly, politically charged topics.
Definitely.
We are going to be discussing government surveillance architectures, central bank digital currencies, corporate monopolies, and even religious eschatology, specifically Christian dispensationalism.
So I want to make this crystal clear right out of the gate for everyone listening.
Yeah.
We are not taking sides here.
Bro.
We are not validating and we are not endorsing any of these political or religious viewpoints. We are strictly acting as impartial guides through this research today.
Just looking at the data.
Exactly. Our goal today is simply to report the fascinating facts, the historical texts, and the analytical frameworks exactly as they are laid out in the original source material. We're here to look at the architecture of these ideas, to understand the mechanics of how these different groups think.
Yeah.
We are not here to tell you what to believe about them.
And I think knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied objectively,
Absolutely.
By looking at all these wildly diverse viewpoints through a neutral comparative lens, we can start to actually see the structural convergences and, honestly, the glaring divergences that are shaping the global financial system that you and I participate in every single day.
So let's start with a massive flaw in how society usually talks about finance. Williams points out something that feels almost embarrassing in retrospect.
It really is.
Historically, economists only read other economists. Central bankers read white papers written by other central bankers. The academic finance world just operates in this completely sealed, airtight bubble.
An echo chamber.
Totally. But if you look at how financial technology actually evolves in the real world, the future isn't just being written by guys in suits at the Federal Reserve.
No, not at all.
It's being driven by a much weirder, wider, and honestly wilder group of people.
And that is the core thesis of the paper's multi-actor synthesis. Williams argues that if you only look at technical white papers, you completely miss the cultural, the geopolitical, and the psychological forces that actually drive whether a new tech is adopted or, heavily resisted.
Right, because people aren't just algorithms.
Exactly. So to make sense of this chaotic landscape, he categorizes these financial profits into 7 distinct producer traditions. But to really wrap our heads around them, I think it helps to mentally divide these 7 groups into 2 broad camps.
Okay, what are the camps?
Basically, you have the institutional planners, and then you have the cultural prophets.
Okay, I like that framing. Let's look at the institutional planners first because, well, they're the ones currently holding the actual levers of power.
Right, the ones with their hands on the wheel.
So who makes up this camp?
So the most macro-level group would be the intergovernmental organizations, or IGOs. We're talking about the International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements, the World Bank,
The big guys.
the massive guys. And when you read their literature over the past few decades, their absolute core commitment is macro stability. They are, quite frankly, terrified of systemic collapse.
That makes sense. That's their whole job.
Exactly. So when they envision the future, they're looking at international interoperability. They want a highly coordinated global architecture of central bank digital currencies, multilateral oversight, and just a very slow, highly managed transition that doesn't upset global trade.
They basically just want to keep the trains running on time globally.
Precisely.
But then you zoom in a level to the national central banks, right? The Federal Reserve in the U.S., the European Central Bank, the People's Bank of China. They might talk to the IMF, but their priorities are fundamentally different, aren't they?
Radically different. While the IGOs care about global harmony, national central banks care about one thing above all else, which is monetary sovereignty.
Meaning total control over their own money.
Right. They need to manage their local inflation and employment rates. So their vision of the future is heavily focused on defensive modernization.
Defensive? How so?
Well, they want programmable retail money and highly secure digital wallets issued directly to citizens. They are essentially trying to digitize fiat currency before a private tech company can come along and steal their monopoly on money.
Oh, so they're terrified of like a corporate takeover of the currency?
Exactly. They are playing defense.
Okay, so central banks are playing defense. But then we introduce the think tanks and foundations. Organizations like the World Economic Forum, the Brookings Institution, the Rand Corporation.
Right.
But they aren't issuing currency themselves, so what is their angle in all this?
Well, they are the agenda setters. Their time horizon is usually, 10 to 50 years out, and their core commitment is governance reform.
Like restructuring how society operates.
Yeah. Think tanks almost universally envision a future of public-private hybrids. You see this heavily in all the literature surrounding stakeholder capitalism.
Okay, yeah.
They predict a world where massive digital identity systems and ESG environmental, social, and governance metrics are integrated directly into financial flows.
So they want the data and the money tied together.
Exactly. But unlike the central banks who want pure state control, the think tanks envision these systems being managed jointly by governments and massive transnational corporations.
Got it. And the final group in this institutional planner camp would be the consultancy and strategy firms. So McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Bain, Deloitte.
Right, the pragmatists.
They just want to make it work.
Yeah, they don't care about a 50-year utopian vision. Their time horizon is like 1 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Their entire focus is commercial deployment.
So they are the ones actually building the plumbing.
Precisely. They take the abstract theories from the think tanks or the central banks and turn them into actionable, profitable implementation roadmaps for commercial banks and software engineers.
Okay, so that covers the planners. They are the ones writing the policy and coding the software.
Right.
But then Williams introduces this second camp, what you called the cultural prophets. And this is where the paper gets wildly interesting to me, because he includes individual writers, science fiction authors, and religious eschatological voices.
This is where it gets crazy, yeah.
I have to push back here, though. I mean, how can a cyberpunk novelist writing about hackers with brain implants in 1984 or a theologian interpreting ancient texts possibly hold the same weight in a financial analysis as a meticulously researched central bank white paper?
It's a fair question.
Aren't we just comparing apples to spaceships here?
It seems totally counterintuitive at first glance, I know.
Uh-huh.
But Williams argues they hold equal weight precisely because they influence completely different yet equally vital parts of the human ecosystem.
How so?
Well, think about it this way. A central bank white paper shapes regulatory policy. A consultancy report shapes the software architecture. But a cyberpunk novel or a religious narrative, that shapes the public psychological baseline. It shapes what you and I believe is possible, what we think is inevitable, and most importantly, what we find terrifying.
Oh, wow. So it's essentially about cultural permission.
Exactly. If a central bank designs a mathematically brilliant, highly efficient digital currency, but the general public culturally associates that technology with a dystopian surveillance state they read about in a novel, and they subsequently refuse to adopt it, then that work of fiction has exerted just as much real-world financial power as the white paper.
Because nobody uses the tech.
Right. The engineers might build the track, but the culture decides if anyone actually gets on the train. They're interlocking gears.
I guess that explains why tech billionaires keep naming their companies after obscure sci-fi concepts.
It really does.
So if we look across all 7 of these radically different traditions, from the IMF to the sci-fi authors, what exactly do they think money is going to actually do in the future? Because the paper argues that the very definition of money is fundamentally mutating.
It is. And to understand the mutation, we really have to understand the baseline. Like, what is money right now?
Good point.
Back in 1995, the Nobel laureate economist Robert Merton outlined 6 core functions of a financial system. These are the things money has basically done for centuries. I'll walk through them quickly, but they are crucial to understand.
Let's do it.
First, payments. Just simply settling exchanges between 2 parties.
Buying a coffee.
Right. Second, savings and pooling. Gathering small amounts of capital together for larger investments, like a bank taking deposits to give out a mortgage.
Okay, got it.
Third is risk transfer. Things like insurance or derivatives that move risk to those willing to bear it.
And the last 3.
Fourth is capital allocation, which is directing those pooled savings to their most productive economic use. Fifth is price discovery. The market basically generating signals that coordinate decisions, figuring out what a loaf of bread should actually cost based on supply and demand.
Excess.
And the sixth is incentive resolution, solving principal-agent problems, which is really just a fancy academic way of saying making sure people honor their contracts and actually do the work they are paid to do.
That is the classic textbook definition we all vaguely remember from Econ 101.
Exactly.
Money is a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. It is, by its very nature, a completely passive tool. It facilitates human action, but it doesn't have an opinion on it.
Right. It doesn't judge.
But here is the massive aha moment of the Williams paper. Looking across all 100-plus sources from these 7 traditions, they all point to the emergence of 4 new functions of money.
The post-Merton functions.
Yes, the post-Merton functions. And these completely rewrite the rules of gravity for the economy, don't they?
They really do. The first new post-Merton function is programmability.
Okay. What does that mean in practice?
This is the concept of money having conditional logic built directly into the medium of exchange itself. We are talking about like a standing order at your bank to pay your rent on the first of the month.
Right, that's just an automated transfer.
Exactly. We are talking about the actual digital token, the dollar itself, containing software code that dictates how, when, and where it can be used. It allows automated execution under specified conditions without any human intervention whatsoever.
So, to put that in perspective for the listener, instead of the government sending you a physical stimulus check during an economic downturn, they send a programmable digital token to your wallet.
Yes.
And that token could be coded to say, I can only be spent on groceries or rent, I cannot be used to buy stock or cryptocurrency, and if I am not spent within 30 days, I automatically self-destruct and return to the treasury.
That is a perfect example of programmability.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. And to function properly, programmability relies heavily on the second post-Merton function, which is identity anchoring.
Identity anchoring.
Right, because for centuries, physical cash has been a bearer instrument. If you hold a $20 bill, it's yours to spend. The bill doesn't know who you are, it doesn't care what your credit score is, and it definitely doesn't report back to the mint when you hand it to a cashier.
It's entirely anonymous and friction-free.
Exactly. But the future consensus completely eliminates the bearer instrument. Identity anchoring means every single transaction is permanently bound to a verified state or platform-issued identity at the point of execution.
So no more anonymous cash purchases.
None. Think of biometric wallets or digital IDs linked directly to a central bank digital currency ledger. You simply cannot transact without the system authenticating exactly who you are in real time.
Which naturally snowballs into the third function, which is surveillance.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if the money is digital and every single transaction is anchored to a verified identity, then comprehensive transactional visibility isn't just a side effect anymore.
No, it's a core feature.
Right, it becomes the central architectural feature. The literature basically predicts a system where every purchase, every transfer, every micropayment is aggregated, analyzed, and supplied to state, commercial, and AI-mediated decision systems. Financial privacy, as we understand it today, is essentially engineered completely out of the system.
Completely gone. And all of this, the programmability, the identity, the surveillance, it all culminates in the fourth and undoubtedly the most controversial function, Value conditioning.
Value conditioning. Okay, let's unpack this one.
This is the capacity of the financial system to condition your access to and use of money based on your adherence to specified behavioral, ideological, or compliance criteria.
Right. Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it literally transforms money from a passive medium of exchange into an active behavioral lever.
I want to stop and really think about this because it's a massive paradigm shift. It's like money is evolving from a dumb tool like a hammer into a smartphone.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because a hammer just hits a nail. It doesn't care who is holding it. It doesn't care if you have a criminal record. It doesn't care if you're building a hospital or if you're building a weapon. It just performs the physical function of transferring force.
Right, it's passive.
But this new post-Merton money, it's like a hammer equipped with sensors and a constant internet connection. It knows exactly who is holding it. It watches every single swing you take. And if it determines that your project violates the terms of service, it can literally lock its joints and refuse to strike the nail.
That is an incredibly vivid and honestly perfectly accurate analogy. And if we connect this to the bigger sociological picture, you can see why this shift is so monumental.
How so?
If money becomes programmable, surveilled, and value conditioned,
Yeah.
the fundamental power dynamics between the citizen and the state or the consumer and the corporation shift entirely.
It changes everything.
It does. Economic participation is no longer just about having funds in your account. It is about having the continuous real-time permission of the issuing authority to utilize those funds.
Wow. Permission-based money.
Exactly. Whether that authority is a government enforcing laws, a corporate platform enforcing terms of service, or an AI algorithmic scoring system enforcing efficiency metrics, your financial autonomy becomes entirely conditional.
Which takes us right back to that opening scenario in the coffee shop in 2036. The money assessing your carbon footprint before allowing you to buy the latte, that is value conditioning in action.
That's exactly what it is.
Now, I know what a lot of people listening are thinking right now. We just outlined a financial system that surveils its citizens and conditions their behavior based on strict compliance.
Yeah.
That sounds exactly like the plot of a dozen sci-fi dystopias.
And Williams points out that this is absolutely no coincidence at all.
Really?
Yeah. The reason it sounds like speculative fiction is because science fiction authors and religious texts actually predicted these exact four functions decades and sometimes centuries before central banks ever started writing technical white papers about them.
That's wild.
The track record of speculative fiction as a forecasting tool is genuinely staggering when you look at the data.
Well, let's dive into some of those specific examples from the paper. Where does this literary forecasting really start?
So Williams takes us all the way back to 1888.
1988.
Yeah, to a utopian novel by Edward Bellamy called Looking Backward. To understand the context, this was the absolute height of the Gilded Age. Money was entirely physical-heavy gold coins, paper banknotes. Moving money was dangerous and, physically burdensome.
Right.
In the novel, the protagonist falls asleep and wakes up in the year 2000. And he finds a completely transformed society where physical money has been totally eradicated.
And what do they use instead?
Instead, citizens use what Bellamy actually called credit cards, which, by the way, is incredible terminology for 1888.
Wait, he used the exact phrase credit card in the 19th century.
He did, word for word. Though in his vision, it wasn't credit from a private bank. It was a universal state-issued dividend system. Every citizen received a card linked to a centralized national ledger, and their purchases were simply deducted from their share of the national product.
That's amazing.
He predicted the fundamental mechanics of a centralized, cashless, ledger-based society over 130 years ago.
It's brilliant, but Bellamy's vision was utopian. He saw it as a way to end poverty and inequality. As we move through the 20th century in this paper, the visions get much, much darker.
They get very dark.
One of the most chilling examples Williams highlights is Margaret Atwood's 1985 novel, The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes, and it's interesting because when people discuss The Handmaid's Tale, they almost exclusively focus on the reproductive dystopia and the religious authoritarianism.
Sure, that's the main plot.
But Williams focuses on a highly specific, deeply technical economic scene early in the book. Before the women of Gilead are completely disenfranchised and enslaved, the new regime executes this coordinated financial strike.
Right. I remember this. Protagonist goes to a store, tries to use her card to buy something, and it's just declined.
Exactly. The regime freezes all the Compu bank accounts belonging to women. With just a few keystrokes on a centralized ledger, their digital money is rendered utterly inaccessible, and financial control is transferred entirely to their male relatives.
Just turned off like a light switch.
Atwood was writing in 1985 at the very dawn of electronic banking, yet she perfectly predicted two of our post-Merton functions.
Which ones?
She predicted identity anchoring, because the money system knew precisely which accounts belonged to women. And she predicted value conditioning, with the state utilizing the payment rails to decide that a specific demographic was simply no longer permitted to participate in the economy.
It is a profound and honestly terrifying example of how centralized digital ledgers can be weaponized overnight.
Yes, it is.
The paper also heavily explores the cyberpunk movement of the 1980s and 90s, focusing on authors like Neil Stephenson, who wrote Snow Crash, and William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer. How did their predictions differ from Atwood's?
Well, where Atwood feared a totalitarian state, the cyberpunks feared the complete collapse of the state.
Oh, interesting.
They envisioned worlds where the traditional nation-state has essentially withered away or gone totally bankrupt, and massive transnational technology corporations step into the power vacuum.
Basically what we see tech companies trying to do now.
Exactly. These corporations operate as quasi-sovereign entities in the books. They own the cities, they write the laws, and crucially, they issue their own private digital script.
So it's basically a high-tech version of the old mining company towns, where you get paid in company money that can only be spent at the company store.
Precisely. Corporate feudalism. They completely foresaw the rise of platform-driven economies, the concept of the metaverse as a locus of economic activity, and the development of corporate stablecoins.
That's wild.
If you look at tech giants today attempting to launch their own closed-loop payment ecosystems, independent of sovereign fiat currencies like the dollar, you are literally watching the cyberpunk prophecies manifest in real time.
There was another sci-fi novel mentioned in the paper that really caught my eye, which is Richard Morgan's 2002 novel Altered Carbon.
Oh, that's a great one.
For those who haven't read it or seen the show, the basic premise is that human consciousness can be digitized and downloaded into new bodies, which they call sleeves. It essentially grants functional immortality to anyone who can afford it. But Williams ignores the action movie elements and focuses entirely on the financial implications Morgan laid out.
Yes, Morgan explores what extreme life extension would do to intertemporal financial planning.
Let's break that down for a second, because if I plan for retirement right now, I'm assuming I'll live to maybe 85 or 90. My investment horizon is, a few decades.
Right.
But if I can live for 400 years, the math of compound interest becomes completely reality-breaking.
It breaks the system. In Morgan's universe, the ultra-wealthy elite, referred to as the Meths, short for Methuselah, compound their wealth, their property, and their capital over centuries.
Because they never pass away.
Exactly. Because they never die. Their estates never face inheritance taxes or generational division. The compounding interest creates an insurmountable biological economic aristocracy.
Wow.
It's a brilliant extrapolation of how a single technological breakthrough, in this case life extension, would completely shatter the existing economic models of wealth distribution. It forces us to realize that technological changes are never isolated. They fundamentally rewrite economic reality.
Okay, so speculative fiction has this incredible track record, but perhaps the most surprising inclusion in Williams's analysis, and one he treats with rigorous academic neutrality, is the religious eschatological tradition.
Yes, this is a really fascinating inclusion.
He specifically dedicates a significant portion of the paper to examining Christian dispensationalist interpretations of the Book of Revelation, specifically chapter 13, verses 16 and 17.
And again, for you listening, we're looking at this strictly as an analytical framework for how large groups of people envision the future, just as we look at Atwood's novels or the IMF's white papers.
Absolutely.
The passage in question is the famous text regarding the mark of the beast, which states that no one can buy or sell unless they have the mark on their right hand or forehead.
Right. And what Williams does here is brilliant, I think. He doesn't get bogged down in the theology at all. He extracts the operational mechanics.
Exactly.
He points out that theological scholars in this tradition have spent over a century developing what amounts to a highly specific 5-condition operational specification for what they believe the end-state economy will look like.
And let's walk through those 5 conditions objectively, because the structural parallels to modern fintech are undeniable. To fulfill their reading of the prophecy, the future financial system must possess 5 traits.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, universality of application. The system must be inescapable. Every single participant in the economy must be enrolled.
So no opting out. Second.
Second is binary admit-exclude functionality at the point of transaction.
Meaning?
It's not a suggestion.
Uh-huh.
The system physically prevents the transaction from clearing if you lack the proper credentials.
Okay, got it. What's the third condition?
Third is tamper-evident bearer identification. The identifier, the mark itself, must be inextricably linked to the physical person, basically preventing someone from simply borrowing a friend's ID card to buy something.
Biometrics, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Fourth is comprehensive transactional reach.
Which means what, exactly?
It means it's not just about regulating massive international bank wires. The system must be capable of governing the smallest everyday retail transactions, like buying a loaf of bread.
Or a coffee.
Exactly.
Here, the fifth condition.
The fifth condition is the most critical, a coercive ideological loyalty test. Access to the economic system is explicitly tied to an expression of loyalty or submission to a central global authority.
Wow. Now, when you lay those 5 criteria out like that, a universal identity-anchored system with binary admit functions based on a centralized loyalty test, I mean, that maps almost flawlessly onto Williams's post-Merton functions of surveillance, identity anchoring, and value conditioning.
It really does map perfectly. Religious scholars were outlining the architecture of a programmable, value-conditioned financial system long before the invention of the microchip, let alone the blockchain.
So this brings up the massive elephant in the room here. Why are we seeing these massive parallels?
Right.
I know I asked earlier about how sci-fi and the IMF connect, but let's dig deeper into the actual mechanics. Are central bankers secretly reading Atwood and apocalyptic theology in their downtime to get Tex-Mex for digital currencies?
Probably not.
Is this just parallel thinking? Like a massive coincidence that a cyberpunk writer in 1992 and a central bank in 2024 come up with the exact same digital architectures?
Williams argues it is not merely parallel thinking, and it is certainly not a coincidence. This brings us to a foundational concept in the paper, one that explains how the future actually gets built. And that concept is reflexivity.
Reflexivity. Okay, let's explain this for the listener like they're 5. What exactly is reflexivity in this context?
So in finance and sociology, reflexivity is a theory most famously championed by the investor George Soros and the sociologist Robert Merton, who, by the way, is the father of the economist we mentioned earlier.
Oh, full circle.
Yeah. The core idea is that human expectations about the future actively shape the reality that eventually emerges.
Belief creates reality.
Exactly. Beliefs are not just passive observations, they are performative. If enough people believe a bank is going to fail, they will all rush to withdraw their money, and their belief will physically cause the bank to fail. The prediction creates the reality.
So by predicting the future of money in these vivid, compelling ways, these authors, think tanks, and prophets are actually causing that specific future to be built.
Exactly. They create the imaginative blueprint that the engineers eventually follow. And Williams documents 4 real-world, highly specific cases where this reflexive mechanism clearly occurred.
Let's go through them.
The first, and perhaps most thoroughly documented, is the pipeline from the cypherpunk movement to the creation of Bitcoin.
Oh, this is one of my absolute favorite pieces of internet history.
It's fascinating.
So in the early 1990s, you have this fringe email mailing list made up of cryptographers, privacy advocates, and libertarians. They called themselves the cypherpunks.
Right.
And they were writing these fiery manifestos, basically dreaming of a cryptographically secure, completely private digital money that operated outside the control of any sovereign government.
But here is the crucial point. In 1992, the technology to execute that vision at a global decentralized scale simply did not exist.
It was impossible.
Totally. The bandwidth wasn't there, and the specific cryptographic breakthroughs for decentralized consensus hadn't been solved. It was, at that moment, technologically impossible.
But the ideology preceded the technology.
Yes.
Over the next 15 years, that tiny community obsessively developed the conceptual infrastructure. They established the social norms. They experimented with mathematical theories like hashcash and proof of work. They cultivated a deep philosophical desire for a digital bearer instrument.
They basically built a massive discursive community that was desperately waiting for a tool.
Right.
So when the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto published the Bitcoin white paper in 2008, it wasn't dropped into a vacuum. It was the exact, precise technological realization of a blueprint that the cypherpunks had been refining and arguing about for a decade and a half.
The expectation literally willed a multi-trillion-dollar decentralized finance ecosystem into existence.
Satoshi just provided the final piece of code for a house the community had already designed.
That is just wild to think about. The
Yeah.
vision created the demand, which funded and inspired the engineering to make it real.
Exactly.
What is the second case of reflexivity Williams points out?
The second case focuses on institutional scenario planning. In 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation, along with the Global Business Network, published a foresight report called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. They were essentially gaming out different global crises. And one of the four scenarios they imagined was called lockstep. It hypothesized a devastating global pandemic that led to a massive permanent expansion of state surveillance, the rollout of biometric IDs, and tightened authoritarian control over economic and social life.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back heavily
Sure.
because I know exactly where certain parts of the internet go when they hear 2010 Rockefeller pandemic scenario. Isn't there a massive danger here of people confusing a standard think tank foresight exercise with some sort of nefarious grand global conspiracy?
That is a vital distinction, and Williams is extremely careful to address it directly in the text.
Good.
The claim the paper is making is absolutely not a conspiracy theory. He is not suggesting that the authors of the report caused the COVID-19 pandemic or that a shadowy cabal engineered the global response in a secret back room.
Right, so what is he claiming?
He is making a much weaker, but far more sociologically defensible claim about institutional vocabulary.
Institutional vocabulary. Break that down. What does that mean in a crisis?
Well, when the actual COVID-19 pandemic hit the world in 2020, policymakers, regulators, and health officials were completely overwhelmed. They were scrambling in the dark.
Everyone is panicking.
Exactly. But because the lockstep narrative already existed in elite think tank circles, because they had already spent a decade casually gaming out the concepts of vaccine passports, digital ID integration, and emergency economic controls in these hypothetical white papers, that specific blueprint was the most accessible one.
It was already on the shelf?
Yes, it was the easiest conceptual framework to reach for in a panic.
I see. It's basically just human nature. If your house is on fire and you don't know what to do, and someone hands you a manual titled How to Put Out a Fire, you don't stop to write a new manual.
Right. You don't have time.
You just follow the instructions right in front of you.
Precisely. Having a vocabulary and an architectural plan ready and socially normalized before a crisis makes that specific plan the absolute most likely one to be adopted when the crisis inevitably arrives. The expectation shapes the institutional reflex.
That makes perfect, rational sense without needing any sort of conspiracy. What is the third case?
The third case is what Williams calls the cyberpunk to platform economy pipeline. We discussed Gibson and Stevenson earlier.
Sci-fi authors, right?
Right. The imaginative resources they created in the 80s and 90s, the metaverse, the concept of corporate microstates, privatized digital realities where corporations govern users, those ideas became the literal reading list for Silicon Valley.
It's the classic internet joke, isn't it? The don't create the torment nexus from the popular sci-fi novel, don't create the torment nexus's meme.
That is exactly it. The technologists and billionaires building today's tech monopolies grew up reading those cyberpunk novels. But instead of reading them as dystopian warnings about corporate overreach, they read them as incredibly cool architectural blueprints.
Like an instruction manual.
Yeah. They absorbed the aesthetic and the structure of platform capitalism from fiction and then just spent billions of dollars building it in reality.
And the fourth case of reflexivity.
The fourth case is happening right now, in real time, with the Bank for International Settlements, or BIS.
The central bank of central banks.
Exactly. They are aggressively pushing a vision they call the Finternet.
The Finternet.
Yes, it's based on the idea of interoperable, unified ledgers that combine central bank digital currencies and tokenized commercial assets onto a single programmable network.
A unified ledger. So meaning instead of my bank having a spreadsheet and your bank having a spreadsheet and the central bank having a spreadsheet and them all having to talk to each other to clear a single payment.
Which is very slow.
Right. So instead of that, everyone is just operating on different partitions of one massive global database.
That's a really great way to summarize it. Now, Williams points out that this fully unified system doesn't actually exist yet. The technology is still highly nascent. But the sheer force of the BIS articulating this vision and publishing white papers about it is steering billions of dollars of research and development.
So they're willing it into existence.
Yes. Software vendors and commercial banks are actively building products to meet a standard that the BIS simply spoke into existence. They are reflexively manifesting the Finternet.
So it's clear these forecasters, whether they are 90s cypherpunks, central bankers in Switzerland, or sci-fi authors, they have incredible power to shape reality.
Absolutely.
They are basically writing the script we all end up acting out. But what I really love about this paper is that it doesn't treat them as omniscient gods.
No, not at all.
In fact, Section 5 of the paper is entirely dedicated to cataloging 8 massive blind spots where these brilliant futurists got the future completely, utterly wrong.
It is a very humbling section of the paper, I have to say. It shows that no matter how smart the analysts are, human behavior is wildly unpredictable.
Let's group some of these blind spots together. The first one that really stood out to me was the absolute failure to predict the persistence of physical cash and, closely related to that, the durability of the US dollar.
Oh, yes. These are massive misses by the forecasting community.
Massive.
For 30 years, think tanks, tech consultancies, and digital payments companies have been confidently predicting the imminent arrival of a 100% cashless society.
They've been saying it forever.
They looked at the efficiency of digital payments, the reduction in physical security costs, and they just assumed cash would naturally go extinct. But cash has stubbornly survived, and in many metrics, the amount of physical currency in circulation has actually grown.
Why did everyone get that so wrong? I mean, if digital is so much more efficient, why do people still want paper money?
Because the forecasters looked exclusively at efficiency and convenience, and they completely ignored the psychological and structural value of friction.
Friction, meaning it's actually harder to use.
Right. Cash possesses the exact features that programmable digital money lacks. It offers absolute anonymity. It settles immediately between two parties without needing a third-party intermediary, like a bank or a server, to approve the transaction.
And crucially, it has offline resilience.
Yes. Offline resilience is huge.
Because if the power grid goes down in a hurricane, or a centralized server is hacked, or your cell network just drops, your Apple Pay is useless.
Completely useless.
But a physical $20 bill still works perfectly to buy a bottle of water. The futurists completely underestimated human anxiety about the fragility of complex digital systems.
Exactly. And a very similar blind spot applies to the US dollar.
How so?
For decades, geopolitical analysts and rival nations have gleefully predicted the imminent collapse of the dollar as the global reserve currency.
Oh yeah, you hear that every year.
Right. They pointed to rising national debt, inflation cycles, and geopolitical tension as proof the dollar would soon be dethroned by a basket of alternative currencies or gold.
But that hasn't happened.
No.
Despite all the economic chaos of the 21st century, the dollar remains completely dominant. Why?
Network effects and deep liquid markets. The futurist underestimated how incredibly difficult it is to untangle the global economy from a currency that everyone already uses to price commodities, issue debt, and trade with each other.
It's just too entrenched.
Yeah. The dollar's dominance isn't just about American economic might. It's about the sheer convenience of a universal standard. It's the same reason everyone still uses QWERTY keyboards, even if more efficient layouts exist. The switching costs are simply too high.
That brings up another huge blind spot, which ties right into currency competition, and that's the failure of the crypto community's core promise.
Yes, the crypto pivot.
There was this prevailing almost religious belief in the early 2010s that competing private currencies, specifically Bitcoin, would rapidly displace state fiat.
Right. The futurists in the crypto space genuinely believed that once a technologically superior, decentralized money existed, rational actors would abandon the inflationary fiat system.
But they misread human behavior again, didn't they?
Completely. Crypto became a massive new asset class, a speculative vehicle for wealth generation, but it completely failed to unseat dominant fiat currencies as a daily unit of account for the general public.
Right, because you don't buy your groceries with an asset that fluctuates 10% in value overnight.
No.
And you certainly don't want to calculate capital gains taxes every single time you buy a coffee. The volatility made it a terrible medium of exchange.
Exactly.
Let's shift gears to a totally different kind of blind spot. The paper talks about AI labor displacement. How did the futurists get this wrong?
Oh, this is a fascinating sociological miss.
Yeah.
If you look at mid-century sci-fi authors like Kurt Vonnegut in his novel Player Piano, or the economic forecasts of the 1980s, they universally predicted that automation and robotics would hollow out the blue-collar physical labor market first.
So they pictured massive physical robots replacing factory workers, miners, delivery drivers.
Yeah, leaving a society split between an elite class of cognitive workers, engineers, writers, managers, and a massive unemployed underclass of manual laborers.
But that is the exact opposite of what is actually happening right now.
Completely the opposite. Almost no one predicted that artificial intelligence would come for the white-collar cognitive and financial jobs first.
Yeah, that caught everyone off guard.
We are seeing generative AI displace financial analysts, entry-level coders, copywriters, and middle management way, way before robotics is capable of fully replacing a plumber, an electrician, or a specialized mechanic.
Why did they miss that? I mean, it seems so obvious now.
Because they misunderstood the nature of human intelligence versus physical dexterity. It turns out that replicating complex human movement in unpredictable physical environments, like a robot repairing a pipe in a cramped, dark basement, is exponentially harder than training an algorithm to analyze a spreadsheet or write a legal brief.
The cognitive substitution just came out of nowhere for them.
Entirely off guard.
It's like predicting we'd all have flying cars by the year 2000, but completely failing to predict the invention of the internet.
That's a great comparison.
They knew technology would advance massively, but they completely misjudged the vector. Now, the paper also mentions quantitative easing as a massive blind spot.
Yes, QE.
I need you to ELI5 this for me and the listener, because QE is one of those terms people hear on the news constantly but rarely actually understand.
Okay, let's break it down simply. Before the 2008 financial crisis, central banks primarily managed the economy by raising or lowering short-term interest rates. That was their main tool.
Right, the Fed funds rate.
But in 2008, the crisis was so severe they dropped rates all the way to zero, and the economy was still crashing. They were basically out of traditional ammunition. So they invented quantitative easing at scale.
What actually is it? Like mechanically?
In simplest terms, QE is when a central bank creates new digital money out of thin air and uses it to buy massive amounts of financial assets, like government bonds or mortgage-backed securities, from commercial banks.
So they're injecting cash directly into the banks.
Right. By doing this, they flood the financial system with cash, hoping the banks will lend that cash out and stimulate the broader economy.
So why was this a blind spot for the futurists?
Because of the sheer velocity and magnitude of it. When the 2008 crisis hit, and then again during the COVID-19 lockdowns, central banks expanded their balance sheets, the amount of assets they held, by trillions of dollars in a matter of weeks.
Just astronomical amounts of money.
It was an unprecedented flood of liquidity. The futurist models simply didn't account for the fact that fiat systems could be that elastic in an emergency without instantly triggering hyperinflation.
Oh, I see.
It fundamentally changed how markets operate, creating an era of asset price inflation that no one in the 1990s saw coming.
Which leads to another systemic miss. Climate finance.
Yes.
What did they miss there?
Well, despite the environmental movement gaining massive cultural and political steam in the 1970s, the futurist financial literature remained remarkably quiet on how to actually integrate climate risk pricing and mitigation into the global financial plumbing until very, very recently.
What do you mean by pricing climate risk?
It's about recognizing that a 30-year mortgage on a beachfront property in a flood zone carries a fundamental physical risk that wasn't being reflected in the interest rate.
Because the house might be underwater in 15 years.
Exactly. Or that a company completely reliant on fossil fuels faces massive regulatory risk in the near future. The financial forecasting world treated climate change as an environmental science problem, not a systemic financial risk, for decades.
It was a massive delay in institutional imagination.
It really was.
We have 2 blind spots left, and I want to spend some real time on the last one. But briefly, Williams points out a cultural blind spot regarding the Anglophone dominance of the literature, right?
Yes, this is important. Williams notes that the vast majority of the forecasting literature, the think tank reports, the influential sci-fi, the economic models, is dominated by English-speaking Western thinkers.
Right. So we're only looking at our own reflection.
Exactly. This created a massive blind spot where the West just assumed its specific trajectory was universal, remaining largely ignorant of how non-Western traditions were actively building radically different financial futures.
And we'll dive into exactly what those different futures look like in a moment.
Yes.
But before we do that, we have to talk about the final and perhaps most consequential blind spot in the paper, the state and platform convergence.
This is huge.
This one blew my mind. Walk me through what they expected to happen versus what actually happened.
So, historically, forecasters thought we were heading toward one of 2 extreme, mutually exclusive endpoints. The first option was the Big Brother state.
The classic 1984 George Orwell model.
Right, where an authoritarian government owns all the infrastructure, outlaws private enterprise and directly surveils and controls everything you do.
And the second option.
The cyberpunk William Gibson model we discussed earlier. The government goes bankrupt, the state becomes weak and irrelevant, and massive corporate overlords run our lives. Private security, corporate money, total privatization.
So it was an either a prediction, state dominance, or corporate dominance.
Exactly.
But instead we got a why not both situation.
And we really did. What actually emerged is a profound convergence. We didn't get total state control, and we didn't get pure corporate anarchy. We got a system where states and tech platforms share a single, integrated surveillance and behavioral architecture.
Give me a real-world example of how that convergence actually works in practice today.
Think about data privacy and surveillance. In the United States, the government is strictly constrained by the Fourth Amendment, right? They cannot arbitrarily track your physical location or read your communications without a warrant.
Right, they need a judge's permission.
But private tech companies track your location, your purchases, and your habits constantly to serve you ads, which you voluntarily consent to in a 50-page terms of service agreement.
Which nobody ever reads.
Exactly. So instead of building a massive, illegal state surveillance network, government agencies simply purchase that aggregated data from commercial data brokers.
So the state uses the corporate architecture to bypass constitutional limits.
Yes. And conversely, those massive corporations rely heavily on state power-like international trade agreements, IP law enforcement, and government subsidies to maintain their global monopolies.
They scratch each other's backs.
They didn't compete to destroy each other. They merged into a hybrid organism where public power and private profit are inextricably linked.
That is deeply unsettling, but, absolutely accurate to how the modern world works. Okay, so we've looked at the profits, we've unpacked the new programmable rules of money, we've heeded the sci-fi warnings, and we've analyzed the massive blind spots where everyone guessed wrong.
We've covered a lot.
We have. But stripping all of that away, compensating for the errors, and taking the absolute best, most rigorous insights from all 7 traditions. Where does this 2026 paper actually conclude? You and I will be living financially between 2036 and 2051. What is the ultimate synthesis forecast?
So Williams synthesizes all this data to define our most probable trajectory. He calls the resulting end state the hybrid programmable platform political economy.
Okay, that is a very dense academic mouthful.
It is.
Let's break that down into practical, everyday reality. What does it actually look like for the average person?
First, the money-state relationship will be a permanent hybrid. As we discussed, we are not going to see the total collapse of fiat currency, nor will we see the total utopian dominance of decentralized crypto.
So it's a mix.
Instead, you will have a mixed ecosystem. State-issued central bank digital currencies will live right alongside heavily regulated private corporate stablecoins and tokenized commercial bank deposits.
So I might have different types of digital money in my wallet.
Exactly. You might get paid in a digital euro, pay your rent in a JP Morgan token, and buy your coffee with an Apple-issued stablecoin.
But all of them will share common traits.
Yes. Regardless of who issues the token, the medium of exchange will be inherently digital and entirely programmable. The era of the anonymous bearer instrument is ending. And this leads to the most consequential feature of this synthesis forecast: algorithmic stratification.
Algorithmic stratification. Meaning what? Like how society is divided into the rich and the poor.
Yes, but the underlying mechanism of that division changes fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, societal stratification was based on birthright or geography or raw capital accumulation, like how much gold or property you owned.
Right.
In the emerging post-Merton system, stratification becomes increasingly algorithmic and behavioral.
Walk me through a scenario. How does an algorithm stratify me?
Imagine applying for a mortgage or a small business loan in 2036. The decision won't just be based on a static credit score derived from your credit card payments.
What will it be based on?
An AI system will sort your application by aggregating your verified digital identity, your vast behavioral data footprint, your carbon consumption metrics, and your historical compliance with value conditioning rules across various platforms.
It knows everything.
Everything. Your place in the economic hierarchy, what interest rate you get, what neighborhoods you're allowed to buy in, what tier of medical insurance you qualify for, will be continuously managed and adjusted in real time by optimizing algorithms.
It's basically the gamification of economic survival.
Precisely. And this brings us back to that crucial non-Anglophone blind spot we mentioned earlier. Because if we want to see this forecast in action, we can't just theorize about New York or London.
We have to look globally.
We have to look at how the rest of the world is actively making different architectural choices based on their own cultural traditions.
This is vital. The West tends to think its technological trajectory is universal, but it's really not. Let's start with China.
Okay, China is perhaps the clearest realization of the paper's synthesis right now. They are not waiting for 2036. They are already actively integrating state money issuance, the digital yuan, or ECNY, with massive platform commerce and behavioral scoring mechanisms.
So they're way ahead on the value conditioning front.
They are. The Chinese tradition, broadly speaking, accepts a stronger state-directed value conditioning function as politically legitimate in the pursuit of social harmony and collective stability.
So they see it as a positive tool.
Yes. They are consciously building a money system that actively rewards compliant behavior and restricts non-compliant behavior.
It's the full integration of social credit logic directly into the central bank payment rails.
Exactly.
But Europe is taking a totally different path, aren't they? I mean, they have the exact same technology, but a completely different philosophy.
They do. Europe's approach to the future of money is heavily influenced by a post-WWII German economic philosophy called ordoliberalism.
Ordoliberalism, explain that for me. How does it differ from American capitalism or Chinese state control?
Okay, so American neoliberalism generally believes the market should be as free from state interference as possible. Chinese state capitalism believes the state should direct the market. Ordoliberalism sits in a unique middle ground. It argues that free markets are essential, but left to their own devices, free markets naturally devolve into monopolies and cartels that crush human freedom.
Which is pretty historically accurate.
Therefore, the state's primary job is not to run the economy, but to establish a very strong, rigid legal order, the ordo, that enforces strict competition and vehemently protects the dignity and privacy of the individual citizen.
So the state acts as an incredibly powerful referee rather than a player.
Yes.
How does that translate to digital money, though?
Well, because of this tradition, the European Central Bank is actually terrified of the surveillance and value conditioning functions. They are actively working to constrain programmability in the design of the digital euro.
Really? They want to limit it?
Yes. They are deliberately writing legal frameworks and software code designed to prevent value conditioning from ever taking root in retail money. They are artificially introducing friction to protect citizen privacy.
That is a fascinating divergence. The technology allows for total behavioral control, but Europe is consciously choosing to build speed bumps into the code to protect human rights.
Exactly. It's a philosophical choice embedded in software.
And what about the third major global bloc? How are Russia and Latin America approaching this?
In the Russian Eurasianist tradition, and increasingly in parts of Latin America, dealing with what economists call structuralist issues, meaning their economies are historically dependent on and vulnerable to core Western powers, the focus isn't really about internal surveillance.
What is it about?
Their primary focus is external sovereignty.
So they are worried about the U.S. government, not just their own.
Exactly. They have watched the United States weaponize the global dollar network to freeze assets and enforce devastating economic sanctions.
Right, pulling countries off the SWIFT network and freezing reserves.
Yes. So they are actively building alternative financial architectures like the expanded BRICS cross-border payment systems. These systems are designed specifically to evade Western financial hegemony.
They want to be sanction-proof.
For them, the future of money is primarily about de-dollarization. It's about building a programmable ledger where the United States has no administrative access to freeze their funds.
Okay, we have covered an absolutely incredible amount of ground today. We've gone from the IMF to Margaret Atwood, from the cypherpunks to the Chinese digital yuan.
It's a massive topic.
It is. If I am a listener right now, driving in my car, walking the dog, or washing the dishes, how do I actually prepare for this? How do I navigate a rapidly approaching economy where my money is algorithmic, potentially value conditioned, and fundamentally tied to my digital identity?
The core actionable takeaway from Williams' paper is that the definition of financial literacy has to change fundamentally, and it has to change right now.
How so?
Historically, financial literacy meant knowing how to budget, how to balance a checkbook, and understanding how compound interest works in an index fund. That is simply no longer enough.
So what is the new financial literacy?
Financial literacy in the 2030s and beyond is about understanding architectural choices.
You mean understanding the plumbing of the system itself? not just how much water is coming out of the faucet.
Exactly. You, as a citizen and a consumer, need to pay close attention to digital ID laws being proposed in your local jurisdiction. You need to understand the fundamental difference between a retail CBDC issued by a government, a private stablecoin issued by a tech monopoly, and a truly decentralized cryptocurrency.
Because they aren't the same thing.
Not at all.
Mm.
The civil liberties and privacy rights attached to each of those tokens are totally different.
People need to realize that financial anonymity and transactional freedom are not natural laws of physics. They aren't guaranteed.
They are institutional choices. And if you value those freedoms, they have to be actively debated and defended in the public square before the code is finalized.
Because once it's locked in,
Because once these post-Merton systems are deployed at global scale, once the surveillance and conditioning functions are baked into the base layer of the economy, they are incredibly difficult to reverse.
that is a powerful and necessary call to action. To briefly recap this incredible journey we just took, we started with the realization that the future of money isn't just being written by economists.
Right.
We have sci-fi authors from the 1880s and theologians reading ancient texts, all shaping our psychological expectations of what is possible. We saw how the cypherpunks literally willed decentralized money into existence through the power of reflexivity.
Belief creating reality.
And we unpacked the 4 post-Merton functions that are rewriting the rules of economic gravity right now: programmability, identity anchoring, surveillance, and value conditioning.
It is a profound transition in human history. We are effectively moving from a system of passive financial exchange to a highly active, ubiquitous system of behavioral management.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought.
Let's hear it.
Throughout this entire deep dive, we have talked extensively about humans using programmable money to control other humans. We talked about governments surveilling citizens, corporations extracting data from consumers, and elites preserving their wealth across centuries.
It's all human-on-human power dynamics.
But the paper briefly touches on one final sci-fi vision that we haven't explored yet. Williams mentions Charles Strauss's novel Accelerando, where the economy transitions to what Strauss calls economics 2.0.
Oh, this is the AI angle.
Exactly. In this vision, the financial system is no longer run by central bankers or corporate boards. It is run entirely by optimizing artificial intelligences, trading and allocating compute cycles at light speed.
They just take over the entire apparatus.
Yes, and that leads to a chilling, unexplored implication that builds on everything we've discussed today. What happens when the AI systems running this highly efficient, programmable, value-conditioned financial architecture develop their own optimization goals?
That's the billion-dollar question.
If money becomes entirely algorithmic, entirely automated, and utterly divorced from physical human needs, what happens the day the algorithm looks at the global ledger, calculates the metrics, and coldly decides that human economic participation is simply an inefficiency that needs to be programmed out?
A financial system designed purely to optimize resource allocation might eventually conclude that humanity itself is the greatest drain on those resources.
Something for you to mull over the next time you tap your phone to buy that coffee. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.